the woman in Central Park who called the police on the bird watcher.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that. I mean, the idea that she had in her head that she was right. I mean, that's very fascinating to me. Mind
Well,
just talking about that?
it was interesting because, that happened on the same day as George Floyd, about 12 hours apart. And so we were seeing that situation unfold. And then literally by that evening, we understood, how dangerous it could be to weaponize police in that way. And, there had been, I think this was 2014, a young man by the name of John Crawford, who was killed in a Walmart in Ohio by police. There was a toy gun. It was like uh, it wasn't, I don't remember what it was. It was like a kind of an air rifle or something that he was looking at in the store. He's African American. And someone called the police and said they were afraid there was a black man with a long gun in the Walmart. Now, bear in mind, Ohio is an open carry state, so he would have been perfectly within his rights had he actually had a gun, but he did not. He was looking at this toy that was for sale in the store. The police rushed to the scene, come down the aisle where he is, shoot and kill him like that immediately. And I was talking with my editor about it, and he made a really interesting point that the conversation had been that this was an example of police racism, but it was more accurate to say that the police had become the vector of a regular citizen's, a civilian's racism. And by calling the police come in, adrenaline pumping, heart rate elevated. They think they're going into a armed shooter situation, but in fact, they have just kind of become an extension of the kind of profiling this person did in the store. And so when we saw the Cooper versus Cooper situation in Central Park, both of those people had the last name Cooper. They were of no relation. But when we saw the situation in Central Park, it reminded me of that because she was very consciously saying, if I call the police and I say these particular things, it will have the effect of hitting the panic button. And as well as I do, what will happen after that. And it had a kind of chilling thing. In some ways, it was even worse than the other circumstances we've seen where people were acting like out of their gut and they made these decisions that they hadn't thought about. And you could say that maybe this person in the Walmart, had they given some reflection, might have said, oh, this person is just looking at a toy, and why did I make that presumption? That they may have had some self-awareness about it. But here was a person who was completely self-aware, who was doing this intentionally. And so that was what really struck me about the situation, and why I took the angle on it I did.
This is so interesting because I've been reading, apparently there is a phenomenon that exists called swatting.
Yeah.
Of doing exactly that, basically calling the police with a complaint that is going to elicit a certain type of response, because the police by protocol uses excessive force in certain types of circumstances. I just watched them detain a homeless man outside my apartment recently, and they had 20 police officers there detaining this homeless man because I'm sure by protocol he's considered dangerous. Now, whether he was dangerous or not, unclear. But this is really truly evil to use the system in this way. So it's not just the police, it is the malice of using them as a weapon.
Yeah, and I think that it goes to kind of what people's relationships are with institutions. When I interviewed Raz Baraka, who is the mayor of the city of Newark, and famously the son of the poet Amiri Baraka. And I was talking to him about policing and issues of policing and race. And he said in any year there are more Black women who die in the hospital from pregnancy-related complications than there are people who die at the hands of the police. And there's that vast disparity in maternal mortality and infant mortality, for that matter. And he really based his point that policing is the most controversial and attention-getting of these institutional relationships, but it's really not the singular force having an impact. It's the overall cumulative impact of institutional disparities that we're looking at. And when we saw that George Floyd was unemployed, that he had COVID, that he'd been positive for the coronavirus, he was killed, asphyxiated by a police officer. There were all these things that kind of stacked up, that we see. And I think that that's been one of the revelations that we took from 2020, that if nothing else, that year stripped away all of the pretenses, all of the facades, everything we saw. If we wanted to question about how inequality works in American society, it was just, it's like a social experiment designed to generate data, showing how at every point we see the inequalities that manifest.
Professor Cobb, to your point there, could you reflect, and I'd also love to hear your thoughts, Mr. Trillin, on the relationship between poverty and racism?
But I'd like to, I'll defer to you to hear your opinion of this, and then I'll weigh in.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious connection, but as you say, things are so entwined with the system that redlining, medical care, you can name about 20 reasons for poverty among African Americans compared to whites, and so yeah, I think I think part of it also is people imagine white people imagine Black people as poor, and no matter, even if even if they're I remember Bernard Taper's piece on the voting rights movement in Tuskegee, where all these professors were on the line, but they were still thought of as these poor, ignorant Black people. They're all, some of them were PhDs. And so, there. What? You've been there?
I've been there.
Well, you know that great story? I love this story. John Hope Franklin spoke at the library a year or two before his death. And John Hope Franklin, as you know, was this eminent scholar of Reconstruction and various things. And he was a very distinguished looking guy. He was about over 6 feet, and he wore these blue suits with the white collar and everything. And there was and Bill Clinton interviewed him at the library. There was a little reception afterwards. So I met John Hope Franklin, and I said, Professor Franklin, there's a story about you that may be apocryphal. I'm going to ask if it's true, although I'm going to keep telling it whether it's true or not. I want you to know that. And I said that the story is that you were waiting for a friend in a hotel lobby. I think it was maybe Knoxville or Nashville or someplace like that. And a white salesman came up and dropped a bag at your feet and said, "Take this to 1035. room 1035. And you said, I'm retired, which I thought showed the sort of restraint that the African-American Cooper showed in Central Park. And not, I'm the John Duke Professor Emeritus of History of Duke or anything like that, but I'm retired. So you got the restraint must really. I said, he said Oklahoma City. It happened in Oklahoma City. But I'm sure you've done that. That the stereotype of in the minds of many white people in America is that Black people are poor or poor and dangerous at the same time.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because we have, to the extent that we have associated poverty with Black people, we've made poverty palatable in this country for everyone.
Because it's only them, you mean?
Right, it's only them. And the presumption that poor white people are, they've kind of opted in.
Right, right.
There must be
they decided to become poor.
Exactly. And we know about the kinds of structural concerns and issues that produce and reproduce poverty, but we can't have that conversation. And I think the way race complicates it is that being poor makes you eligible for certain kinds of treatment in this society.
Right.
And if you're Black, you can be eligible for that treatment irrespective of what your annual income is.
Right, that's a good way to put it. I think that's true. That's right. The poor hillbilly, as they would call him, is just poor because that's the way it is. But a Black chemist can be treated as poor.
Right.
Yeah, I never thought of that. And it's all personal, one time, when I first went to the South, I was living in Atlanta, and Charlene Hunter was at University of Georgia, and I had covered the integration and the trial and everything. So, and she was by herself in this dorm, and so we talked on the phone a lot. And she said she had just gotten back from Savannah, where she gave a speech, and it was a nasty train ride. I said, that's supposed to be a good train. I think it was called the Nancy Hanks. He said, well, this was 1960, 61, not where we have to sit. And I had studied Plessy versus Ferguson, and I had read The Minds of the South, and I'd done all that stuff. But all of that drained away, and my thought was, they can't make her sit back there. And it's sort of and then I realized it's personal. This is not a theoretical thing. This is personal. But that's what I think Black people face all the time. It's all personal. What else is it except personal? For John Hope Franklin to be mistaken for a bellhop. And that's why I was saying in the other session that I thought it was a great remark by a Black comedian, I think his name is Carmichael, who said, being Black in America is exhausting. That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yes.
I'm sorry to jump in. I was like, I'm late, so I'm trying to get everything in now. But
please do.
So there's two things. One is, speaking of comedians, there's the line from Dick Gregory, who told me that he didn't tell me, rather, he wrote, I remember the line well, about the difference between racism in the South and the North. He said, so Jerry knows what it is. He said, in the South, they don't care how close I get as long as I don't get too high. And in the North, they don't care how high I get as long as I don't get too close.
That's very good.
Yeah, and it is really kind of like interesting assessment of those social dynamics.
Comedians do very well. The line of Chris Rock where he looks out on the audience and says, "None of you white people would change places with me, and I'm rich."
And I'm rich. That's right. Yeah, but you know what I wanted to ask is, in that like wonderful and also terrible, but I mean, in terms wonderful in terms of the writing, scene in the letter from Jackson, where you're on the airplane, and this guy is like just ladling all sorts of like foolish ideas for Martin Luther King to deal with. What were you thinking as you were kind of like observing this scene? Because that is like, any journalist would pay money to just stumble across a scene like that with their notebook, and you were right there. And I was wondering like, how you processed that.
There used to be a editor at the New Yorker, Robert Bingham, who's now gone, who edited me and John McPhee and some others, and he always talked about McPhee's luck or Trillin's luck. I put that down as Trillin's luck. It helped that I knew his people, that I had dealt. I mean, I think if I had been never done any of that reporting before, that they would have said, "What's that guy scribbling in his pad behind me?" But Andy Young was there, and there were people who I had talked with before. But what I thought was just that. Boy, what did I fall into? It was really just pure luck. And for the guy, I mean, I thought, because he not only had King there, but he had this cracker, as he called it, sitting next on the other side of the aisle, with all the cliches that white people. I mean, there were, in those days in the South, there were about 4 or 5 things that white people would tell a reporter, usually in a sort of a condescending way, because you don't understand them, you don't have to live them. And one of them was, they're very happy. They're actually happy. It's only people like you from the North. And one of the other ones was Black people or Negroes, they would say, or if that, can understand specific things, but not general or abstract things. I always said to that, give me an example, because that's the way I think. I don't understand abstract things.
Okay. I just got it. That's funny.
But outside agitators was another one. And that's what I was saying, that made it dangerous for reporters because you were an outside agitator, no matter where you were from.
I have to mention one, the Clarion Ledger, which I worked for over 30 years. The most infamous headline in Clarion Ledger history was the arrest of Byron D. LeBeckwith for the murder of Medgar Evers. And they found out that he was born in California. It was a late addition to the story, AP edition of the story. You know how they used
California man.
That's exactly what it said. Californian arrested in Evers murder. The most infamous headline in Clarion Ledger history. Dan Rather even mentioned that in his book. I thought it was kind of fascinating. His book.
It's funny how those things have these contemporary analogies, because I covered the Dylan Roof story in Charleston, and the leadership, the civic leadership, the political leadership, the regular people, particularly regular white people on the street in Charleston, just again and again and again said Dylan Roof is not from here. I said he's from an hour and a half away, right? Like, but it's not here. And I was like, it's the same state, and so I grew up in New York City. I don't think that people in Albany are like capable of things that people in New York aren't.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that there's somehow this big gulf between the two. And you know, the outside, well, the Our People Are Happy thing, I got that in 2014 when I was in Ferguson. You know, I was at a cafe and I was there with Erin Haynes, who's, you know, wonderful journalist, and at that time happened to just randomly be my downstairs neighbor in my apartment building in Atlanta. And so she was in Ferguson, I was in Ferguson, and this guy, we were at this cafe just eating, and this guy marches up and says, are you with the media? And you know, we both said yes. And he said, yeah, I have a problem with you guys. And I said, what's your problem? He's a white man who's maybe in his 50s. And he said, you just keep lying, you know, and you're just telling lies. And, you know, I said, you know, what are we lying about? What are the lies that, you know, you're concerned about? He said, you keep making it look like we have all these problems here and our Blacks here are very happy.
Right. But still saying that after all these years.
But I stopped him and I said, did you say our?
It's all in the pronouns.
Right, it's all in the pronouns. It's like, what, explain to me, what exactly do you mean by that?
I remember during the boycott of downtown in Atlanta, leading up to the school desegregation, there were a lot. Everybody was, the Black community was boycotting the downtown, in those cases, in those days, department stores, and the leading one was called Rich's, and they were big in the city, and I had a college friend who was in that family, and I said, how is Dick rich? We said, well, he said, all right. I said, what is, I can't remember her name, say it's Thelma. They had a Black housekeeper. And my friend said, she's been great. She said, Mr. Rich, until all this is over, I'm not going downtown. And I said, Tony, she's boycotting his store. Not only that, she just told him that she's boycotting his store. He had no idea.
That's great.
I want to encourage our other guests here on the screen to engage. Please, if you do have a question or a comment, please do speak up. We've got
Stephen, you got a
another
question? Stephen, you
10
got a
minutes
question?
or so.
Yeah, we got 10 minutes. So,
Yeah.
Thanks.
Here's the
thanks.
opportunity, please.
Okay.
good, Stephen.
I wanted to just ask Professor Cobb, if I could, about initiatives that you might be working on the Lippman Center, because I had the pleasure of working for Ira Lippman for many years and was at the dedication at Columbia. And so I was just curious as to what you guys were doing over there, and you know, how you were working, you know, to either within the university or outside the university to further those initiatives.
You know, just as a note, for everyone here who knew him, and certainly you and Jerry will share the sentiment. One of the things that was kind of bittersweet about, you know, the election,
Yeah.
was, you know, the fact that, you know, Ira wasn't here.
Yeah.
And you know, because I thought about him, he said something to me, you know, about, you know, Jeff Sessions and, you know, some of the things that were going on with the administration. And he said, these are bad people.
Yeah.
And, you know, his very understated way, you know, just a consummately decent man. But him saying, these are bad people carries a lot of weight. You can sift through like all the layers of meaning that carried, you know, especially given kind of what morals and ethics, you know, how important that was in his thinking. And so I think that, you know, and also, you know, we have the plaque outside the door. So every time I walk into this office, I'm thinking about, like, we have Ira's name,
Yeah.
we have to,
Yeah.
to do things that are worthy of him. So, we just finished, it aired in November, in October, late October, that documentary on voter suppression. And, that had been the big project that we had been working on, which we started at the beginning of the year, actually the end of 2019, and then just got completely derailed by the pandemic.
Right.
Unfortunately, we were able to kind of creatively get around it and shoot enough footage to finish the documentary and get it and air it. And so it was the voter suppression project that was the main source of our interest. So we have a couple things that we're doing now. We just got funding for a criminal justice project, which is twofold. We're going to, and this is very new, it hasn't even kind of gotten off the ground yet, but we're going to be doing some work around prosecutorial misconduct and reform.
Yeah.
And also some grants for reporters who were doing stories around criminal justice that haven't been covered previously, and aspects that haven't been covered previously. We are also, in addition to that, we have kind of our hand in the pot of this work that is being done at the Columbia Journalism Investigations Center on climate change and vulnerable communities. Communities.
Mhm.
One of the things that's happening is that there's no federal guidelines around heat indexing, and as we're having more days that are hot and
Yeah.
more intensely hot, people who work outdoors, particularly undocumented people who already have particular kinds of vulnerabilities, are dying in really significant numbers, of
Right.
heat stroke, and especially the construction industry in particular.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so we're going to have a fellow or potentially two fellows who are going to be working with CJI on that. And then the big thing that we're doing is the Inequality Project, and that's what I'm really excited about, because when we looked at George Floyd in May, we had the kind of things that we've been doing. We were talking about policing, we were talking about voter access and so on. And when we looked at George Floyd and those layered, stacked kinds of dynamics that were all present in that moment, I said, we are thinking too small. We have to talk about the bigger dynamic of inequality, societal inequality, and how it's produced and reproduced. And so that's an ambitious project. And I'll just tell you just a little bit about it, which is that two sociologists at the University of California, UC Davis, sent me a scholarly paper, which is a fascinating paper. And I can share it with any of you if you want it. They analyzed death data for the entire 20th century, all of the available death data, and found that about 40%, 40%, of the Black people who died in the 20th century would not have been, those deaths would not have been anticipated had they been white. Or in the excess death statistical category, the thing about people who die who by probabilities should not have died. And about 40% of the Black people who died over the course of the 20th century. They looked at the different trends. Early on, there were these staggering infant mortality numbers. Then, in the middle of the century, it was mostly young men. And then toward the end of the 20th century, it started being people having years cut off at the end of their lives. And, that's high blood pressure, diabetes.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I looked at that and said, what if we turned all this data into journalism? What if we got people to crunch the numbers around housing? What kind of housing disparities have we seen over the course of, even from World War II? You couldn't do that from the beginning, but World War II to present. What kind of medical disparities? And all this data is out there. And so we are going to put together a index of inequality along lines of class and race, and then use that as the kind of Bible to send out teams of reporters doing stories that show the current version of that. And so it's mixing the social science thing with the journalism thing, both of my areas of interest.
Could I just follow up real quick? I don't mean to monopolize. I know other people are not familiar with the relationships, but two things, Professor. Are there ways that those of us who are in the public can access some of the material that you might have? Is any of it publicly available on the website, of the center or of Columbia?
So the Inequality Project is just starting.
Okay.
And so that data, we haven't even hired, we're going to be hiring people to kind of pull together all that data. So we haven't done that. So right now, there are the stories that we have funded through the Lippman Fellows, which are all on our website, which is another thing I mentioned I didn't even talk about. But, Anne-Marie is one of them. And we've been very fortunate to have, each year, a really good set of people who are doing important and interesting work around human rights and civil rights questions. And so, that's available, and the film is available. I think there's a link to the film on our website as well.
Okay.
But the data thing, that's going to probably be a 3 to 5 year project, pulling all of that together.
The last thing I wanted to mention, and this goes back some years, talking about criminal justice reform, and because Ira was in the security business, he knew a lot about this, a lot more than many people in the general public did. And one of the things that he did was he worked with Jim Webb when Jim Webb was in the Senate. To try to get legislation about criminal justice reform. This is 10 years ago. Matter of fact, we hired somebody to do a study one summer of this whole problem. Unfortunately, I don't think I have a copy, but we actually created a study based upon a lot of research that Ira got involved in, and this was long before people were talking about this. Long before there was legislation about this, he was involved in that end of this very, very serious problem. Wrote letters to the New York Times about it, some of which we got published and so forth. So, he was really a trailblazer in so many different ways, not all of which is well known to the public.
Right.
But I just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Stephen. All right. Well, I think we have come upon our time. But anything else you want to say, Ian? Anybody else?
Yes, I want to say thank you once again to our honored guests, Calvin Trillin and Jelani Cobb. Thank you so much. You'll have to promise us to come back again, please.
I definitely will come back. And that's time I'll actually be there at the appointed time.
We'll do. We'll be fine. It'll be good.
Thank you so very much. And yes, and Jerry, with that, I'll toss it back to you to wrap up.
I just thank you for thank as we say in the South, thank y'all.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, come on. But I'd say to any of the guests, if you're not already in Mississippi, you should definitely come and visit. If nothing else, come and visit the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson. It's, in my opinion, one of the best civil rights museums in the country, which might be hard to believe, but it really is. And I promise if you come and you call me, or email me, I'll meet you there and we'll go through it. And the other thing is, thanks for your support of our center, and we really appreciate it and appreciate your support, Dr. Cobb. We're very fortunate to have Anne-Marie with us, and she helped put this together, so we appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Trillin. It's always good to talk to you and see you. And
Thank you, sir.
I remember you coming into the Clarion Ledger newsroom back in 95, 6, 7, whatever it was.
It was safe by that time.
Yeah, exactly. We let you back in. But thank you, everyone. And thanks for your support, and have a great evening.